Okay, we're going to look at Canada's first issues. We call them the Pence issue from 1851 to 59, before Canada's Confederation in 67. We're looking at numbers 1 to 13 in particular here, and varieties on them. First of all, a little description about them. Numbers 1 to 3 was the initial issue from 1851. We had the three-penny beaver, designed by Sir Sanford Fleming. Sir Sanford Fleming is probably more famous for being critical or instrumental in the development of standard time and time zones around the world. And our beaver, he also was instrumental in developing the railway system across Canada that linked Eastern Canada with Western Canada. And we have Prince Albert, His Royal Highness the Prince Consort, on the sixpenny. And we have Queen Victoria in her youth on the 12-penny. The 12-penny black, well, what you'll see in the presentation is all from my collection, including this one, but the mint version of this ranges from $30,000 to $160,000. So it's way out of reach, but specimens are within reach. Where did the young Queen Victoria's image come from? It came from this, which came from what's called the Chalon portrait of Queen Victoria, presented by Queen Victoria in 1840 to the King of Portugal. But I think we've talked about this. This crown is not at all how it would appear in reality. It's a diadem. It had 8 features on it, 4 cloths and 4 flowers. And this is the Winter Howler portrait from 1859. And that's what the crown would really look like on someone's head. There's no way you could see 6 of these features on the crown, but I guess the artists wanted it to be more glamorous than it really was. Here's a picture of young Queen Elizabeth wearing that same crown, and an older Queen Elizabeth. So it was a figment of the artistic license, call it artistic license, for the diamond diadem on Queen Victoria's head. So the next issues, we call them the 1852 to 57 Pence issues. Numbers 4, 5, there was no number 6. 7 to 9 on wove paper, and they're imperf. Number 10 was only issued in 1857, right at the end of the period, on a very thick soft paper. It's also very rare. Here we see they use the same design for the 4 and 5, and I presume the number 6 left aside, assuming another Queen Victoria stamp would come, but it didn't come then. The 10 was also, the same design was used on the 10-penny. But this is not in my collection. Number 5 is, but the number 10 is not. So the 6-penny did come through as number 9 with Queen Victoria's image. And we also had 10 pence Jacques Cartier as number 7, and we had a number 8, which is another image of Queen Victoria, halfpenny. It's interesting that this image here is the same image that we see on GB stamps, including the penny red. And it's the same image that GB used for Queen Victoria for an entire reign. They never aged her at all. It's the same stamp image. If you go back to 1900, the image of her image on the stamps is still the image from 1942 or so. The final issues, part of the Pence issues, numbers 11, 13, they are the same stamps, but they're on wove paper and they're perforated now. So they moved to perforations. So here's the halfpenny Queen Victoria, number 11. 3-penny, this one's on cover. And the 6-penny, His Royal Highness Prince Consort, that's also an extremely expensive one. This is actually a forgery because I can't afford the real one. But those are the same 3 that we had. 3 of these same images from earlier Pence issues. So that's what they are. In terms of varieties, we're going to look at a whole bunch of different varieties. The turn folded letter, a famous person, the major reentries, cracked die, thin paper, morning cover, partial imprint, weeping sun, die mark, and misperf. Those are ones on cover. And we'll look at some singles. Again, major reentry, cracked dies, reverse offset, plate scratch, die flaw, horizontal guideline, different kinds of papers. The Oneglia forgery, this is an interesting one. I spend a little more time on that one when we get there. Specimens, reproductions, and fakes. So those are the scope of varieties. 26 in total, 12 on cover, and 14 singles. So let's start with number 1. It's the 3-penny on a turned folded letter addressed to a very honorable Alexander Fraser. He was important had various roles. It's a split ring Creemore Mills, Canada West, 1852. It's the earliest recorded date and only recorded example. It's a turned folded letter because it was addressed originally from Creemore Hills by a Mr. Webster. And here's his letter. And then here, Mr. Alexander Fraser, he takes the same letter and adds his comments to the bottom. And that's why they refer to it as a turned letter. He puts it again. He puts on here as it's paid, Alexander Fraser, paid 3 to a Mr. Dunbar Pringle. And in this letter, he's basically saying, well, Mr. Fraser owes me money. Don't put him in jail. Be gentle. He was also the Justice of the Peace, politician, very interesting really. And he was a commanding officer of the Glengarry militia during the rebellion there. Number 2, we're going to go on to about someone very famous, Mrs. Frances Parkman. She wasn't famous, but her husband certainly was. Here's a picture of the stamp. Genuine. He was born to a distinguished family. He had well-to-do. He got a law degree, but not mainly because he was interested, mainly because it seemed like parental pressure. He decided not to pursue law, but instead wrote American history. Most famous, of course, is the Oregon Trail. It recounts his 3 weeks that he spent hunting buffalo. He also wrote The France and England in North America, 7 volumes. And that would perhaps explain why this and another letter I have from a later period is from Montreal. So because he also had to do some research in Montreal, and that letter that we saw was addressed from Montreal to Mrs. Frances Parkman, either his mother or his wife, we're not sure, because his father was also Francis Parkman. His writings were very well received, most generally. He was also very sexist and was not in favor of women's rights. But President Roosevelt dedicated his 4-volume history to Parkman. That's a little bit about Parkman. Here's number 3. This is, of course, the most famous stamp in Canadian philately. It's this particular example is just a souvenir cutout. So this is a forgery. Well, not even forgery. It's a replica of the first annual edition from this announcement for the first annual edition of Canada's Specialized Postage Stamp Catalog in 1973. Everyone, this stamp catalog now is the Bible in Canadian philately in terms of we call it the Unitrade catalog. And they use the same Scott numbers, but it does have specialized information on it. Here's the 3-penny specimen and the certificate for it. We're continuing on now with the number 4. And we see this is a major reentry. Position 47, pane A on a folded letter. And the key features here we're looking for is the doubling in the top of the letters of E and pen, plus doubling in each of the 4 corners. A single reentry produces all of these features. So all of these features, marks, doublings, whatever you wish to call them, is part of one reentry. Okay, now we're going to compare that with position 47, pane A, with those are the features on it. You notice I don't call them reentries. They are features. We'll discuss it in a second. Here is position 61, pane B, another similar reentry because it has got the doubling in the bottom of the 3s, but not in the top. And the doubling here is more in the oval. And there's a little hint of the doubling in the letters here, but most of the key doubling is in the oval lines here, rather than in the lettering of E and pen. So again, 2 very similar reentries, major reentries listed. Here's another example, a second single, loose single number of position 47 of the major. Again, we see the doubling in the 4 corners. and the doubling here. Now, it's important to note that when we talk about these marks or features or doubling, they're not referred to as reentries. Reentries, it's one reentry that causes all of these. So we refer to our reentry as a single. You don't refer to reentries in the plural form on a single stamp. But what's interesting here is, this is to sound that same example, we see a plate crack or a cracked die, where this crack here running through the R and coming down, down, down here through the beaver, it actually occurs on multiple stamps. So it couldn't have been on a single plate. When we talk about a plate crack, it's on a single stamp. And a die crack, this is on the transfer die that's transferred to the transfer roll. And when the transfer roll is pushed into the printing plate, it transfers this same crack image to the printing plate. Michael Smith's article in BNAPS from August of 2022 he was talking about this end flaw. There's a bit of an end flaw here in his letters. And he featured 14 different scans from pane A and 24 from pane B. There's 38 in total. All of them showed that beaver crack coming up here. And it's not described and not talked about very much. I haven't been seeing any references to anyone talking about it, except Flyspecker did note that this is what the full crack is expected to look like. I haven't seen details in this area very much, ever, in this part. Little hint, perhaps, we'll see on another slide here of the crack coming across. But it was on the master die, got pushed into the transfer roll, and then the transfer roll carried it over to the individual printing plate at the various positions. Here's another example of the crack die on an orange thin paper version of the stamp. Here we can see it again coming up right through there, same place, right through the R and VR, Victoria Regina, and comes up here. Not sure if there's a little bit over here or not, but it's very hard to see any of the crack through the side. Here's on a fourth example on the morning cover. Here we see it coming up through here again, through here, partially hidden by the cancel. So it's there. We're also looking at the major reentry on position 42. It's a different kind of a major entry because it's doubling in the lower left corner. You can see it pretty here, even on the full stamp, but in the close-up, that's what it looks like. That's position 42 for number 4. And we can also have a partial imprint. Now, where were these stamps printed? In the US. By Rodden, Wright, Hatch, and Edison in New York. And the imprint on the bottom of this printing plate is upside down. And so it's in positions, this is positions 99, and the rest of it continues on position 98. The Weeping Sun from position 50 is on cover. And here what we're looking at is just this little teardrop coming down from the sun's eye. This is not a re-entry at all. This is just a simple plate flaw. Something marked the plate and dented it, and as a result, there's ink now depositing in that little spot. Mishandling presumably caused that. The Weeping Sun, position 50. Here we have a cracked die again, but with a faint reverse offset. Here we can see the cracked die. It's partially hidden by the cancel there, but it's a little more evident here. Well, what's interesting about this variety is if we flip it over, we'll see the reverse offset here. There, a bit stronger here. And this, of course, is not the reverse offset. This is the image of the stamp image coming through the paper. So it's important not to mix up reverse offset with just the stamp image coming through the paper. Here we see the reverse offset right there. Still staying on the number 4, we have a re-entry with a plate scratch. Now, the re-entry is a little bit interesting because it is actually in the imprint, not on the stamp. Highlighted by Mr. Trimble on his website, reentries.com, and the scan is compliments of Ken Kershaw. But it's this doubling of extra dots on the bottom of the imprint that is the re-entry. What is shown in his scan and what we can see in this pair couple is a scratch that's coming right down the middle of the stamps. It's on the printing plate. It's on the actual inch, but it's not discussed at all in any literature that I found. But it's not even, no one's even noted that it exists. Here it is. Here it is. So you can see it coming through the beaver. It's not a plate crack, because cracks would have a more of a wavy nature. You can see part of it is even actually coming up through here, right through there. So it's a straight line of some kind. If we go move on to the number 5, the 6-penny. So it got a die flaw. Interesting. It's a pair. When we're looking at here, this corner, we can see here this corner's got a little bit of a curve to it, like this. If you look at it closely, you can see there's a bit of a curve. Compare that with the right-hand corners, and they are very sharp and straight. Perfect right angles. This has got a bit of a weave in it. And we can see a bit of a hint of a doubling right down there coming in. Now, is this a reentry? No, because if it happens on more than one stamp, it's not a reentry. It must be on the transfer die. And maybe it came on the crack die. Maybe it was a reentry on the crack die or a master die. But it looks like whatever it is, it's been transferred through these two positions. I haven't done more research to figure out if it's on all positions on the plate or not. It's a die flaw, possibly. If we move on to number 7, the 10-penny Jacques Cartier with a major reentry, bright blue, position 6 on the cover to Europe. And here it's hard to see the reentries in this, but if we look at closely, we can see this is the doubling here. There's a funny mark here. We'll talk about that one in a minute. That is not part of the reentry. It's not a feature of the associated with the reentry. Reentries generally have a vertical or a horizontal shift to them. And in this case, it's pretty clear there's a vertical shift related to this reentry. If we look at from position 53, here we see a horizontal shift to the reentry. The lines are inside here, always to the right, and here again to the right. So it's a horizontal shift of when the printing plate was re-entered. Here we have a horizontal guideline coming through the middle of the stamp. Many stamps have it. It doesn't show up here, interestingly, because blue is a very hard color to copy. But when you light it up with artificial light, then we can see the blue better. But I said there's this little mark up here. We looked at position 6. We see it also in position 53, both in the major. And here we see it, the one stamp that had the guideline, we see it. And here's position 16, also with a major reentry. We see this particular feature on all stamps. This is, and while Ralph Tremble scans show the same for different positions on the plate, also show the same mark. That's pretty clear. It is a die mark. It was transferred on the original. It was, for whatever reason, it appeared on the original die and has been transferred to all the different positions on the printing plate. Moving on to number 8, the half-penny Queen Victoria with a major reentry, position 120. Okay, so I think we can pretty well guess that means it's in the bottom right-hand corner and of the printing plate, and that's what we're looking for. It's this doubling in half. And so what's interesting to note, because it's on the bottom right-hand corner, when the postal officials decided to perforate the stamps, they removed the 2 left rows. So instead of having 12 rows by 10 to 10 rows by 12 columns, it's now just 10 by 10. So they removed the 2 left-hand columns from the printing plate so that the stamps would fit through the perforator. But what that meant was that any varieties that were on number 8, if they were on the columns 3 through 10, 3 through 12, they would appear on the perforated version, but in a new position number. So this is now the same variety here, the doubling or the reentry, would appear on position 100 on number 11. Similarly, with the other 2 other stamps that were perforated, they were also trimmed. If we look at the 8 halfpenny with a cracked die, Here's an interesting one. We can see, can't see it very well, but in this close-up, in a close-up, we'll look at it. It's right here. We can see a cracked die on this. If we look at Ralph Trimble's website again, reentries.com, we see this position 22 has it. Position 42 has it. Right there and there. And 58 and 96 have it on these proof scans. And then if we look at the specimen, he has this, I don't own any of these specimens. We can see it in those locations again. It looks like it was transferred from, was a plate crack on the master die onto the transfer roll and then onto the printing plate in probably all positions, but it's just more obvious in some than in others. So that's a cracked die on the halfpenny Queen Victoria. Here's an interesting Queen Victoria has been repaired and rebacked. Why would you do that? Because according to the dealer, it's the only known 48 four-ring strike from Thorold, Upper Canada. So that would probably justify going to the effort of repairing it and rebacking it. Number 8A, which is different paper varieties. And this is on horizontally ribbed paper, and this is in vertically ribbed paper. So that's within the varieties spectrum to look at the different ribs on the paper. And they're noticeable. You can see them in the back. Hard to tell on cover. If we also have a specimen of the halfpenny Queen Victoria, and it's from position 58. It's got enough features on it that you can tell that these are the marks that are looking for. They're looking for all these marks to tell us that this particular specimen stamp came on position 58 of number 8. Here's the number 11, the perforated version of that with a major entry from position 7. What we're looking at is the doubling down here in the left corner and some very unusual marks in the G and E and the lettering of postage. Here's number 11, misperf. I think misperfs can be cool, especially when we see part of the other stamp on it. It's a dramatic misperf, and to get this one on cover is unusual for sure. Number 12, this is the 3-penny beaver, now perforated version. When we turn it sideways on cover from 1859, we see some unusual mark right here in the O. I'm not sure if that's associated with it all. I haven't been able to do any more research on it. It's a fairly new one in the collection, and but I'm looking forward to getting information on it. And finally, I think we're coming down to, oh no, this is the interesting part. Okay, Oneglia. Who was Oneglia? Well, he was famous for doing forgeries. We'll talk about him. We're looking at this stamp, Erasmo Oneglia. He's an Italian printer in Turin. He did forgeries on Newfoundland stamps. That's according to Wikipedia. We also know he did forgeries on Canadian stamps. In 1897, he was arrested, doing what he shouldn't be doing. He was given a 20-shilling fine, and all his stock was confiscated. He was associated with the other names that are famous in Italian forgeries, Angelo Panelli and Jean Disparati. We've talked about them in a previous presentation, but he did his work. So my question was, how can I tell an Oneglia forgery from a genuine stamp? Well, there's perforations weren't quite right, but outside of the perforations. So here we see the forgery, and here we see this genuine pair. And we're going to look at this in different areas. We're going to start in the beaver in the center and see what we can see. I'll hold it up. Maybe you can spot something already. We'll get to it in a sec. Here's the beaver, the forgery, and the genuine. And try as I might, I couldn't make any, the claws and the fingers are all correct here in the feet of the beaver. And the lines look good. Everything in terms of the beaver, I couldn't see anything that would distinguish the forgery from the genuine. There is, of course, the die crack coming through it, which, of course, he didn't have. If we look now at the crown, again, very subtle. The flower's good down here. The details in here look good. The jewels. There's a minor difference up here in the position of this line. This margin line is a little closer. The total space is the same, but this line is a little bit higher up on the genuine versus the forgery. That's a pretty subtle difference. If we look at the lettering, here's where we start to see more significant differences. The lettering here, what we're looking at is the kerfs, the serif on the individual letters. They're not very well defined here on the forgery. They're very clear and sharp here. Also on the S, they're much larger, smaller. T, they're much larger. Whoops. Also on the T. So there is a significant difference in the lettering in the forgery. Again, the lettering comes through here. We're looking at the letterings on the bottom of H. Here we see real feet in the serif, the R too. Interestingly, on the E, he missed this vertical member completely on the forgery. And in Canada, again, more lettering again. We see the quality of the serif on the lettering. And now we come to the favorite, the major difference that you don't even need to look at the letters. We should look at the numbers in the corner. Here's the number 3. There's not only is the number itself a different shape, and it's got an extra thingy here versus nothing there. What is really noticeable is that the ornaments, as we call it, in the background are completely missing. He probably got tired and said, "Oh, I'm not bothering engraving all those details in the corners." There, yes, it's quite obvious. See, these corners don't have any of the ornaments that the actual genuine beaver has.
What strikes me about the Onellia forgeries, and by the way, he made forgeries of the Greek Hermes head stamps as well.
Okay.
The engraving is even crisper. I mean,
Yes.
it's so perfect and wonderful, even though he missed so many details, and it's easy to identify. Just the crispness and perfection of his engraving, I find really impressive.
Crisp is a good word to describe it. But I was also keen to know, I wanted to use the stamp analyzer. Of course, if I use the stamp analyzer, which measures both perforations, and I wanted to measure dimensions with the stamp analyzer. Of course, I did do a test here at 300 DPI and at 1200 DPI, and the perforations were basically 1116 here and 1116, good. 1125, 1121, so it's a little bit off on the right side. 1074, 1074 bottom, and 1074, 1076 on the left side. So the higher resolution can give you slightly different numbers, but basically for all intents and purposes, I consider those to be the same numbers. When we compare with what Sparks advertised on their auction listing in their auction catalog, they called it 11.1 by 10.75, which means they had the top correct, but the bottom wasn't even close. And here they had the left side right, but the right side wasn't. So it looks to me like the actual perforations machines were, he had two sets of line perfs, one which was at 11.1, one was at 10.75. And they got different perfs on the different sides of the stamps in the top and bottom. Of course, the stamp analyzer, when he does the perf, of course, it comes in as imperf, which is what you'd expect. But I was really interested in figuring out how dimensionally accurate was the forgery compared with a genuine. And that's where the stamp analyzer can come in. But when we looked at the dimensional using the rulers on this, there is this measuring tape feature down here that you click on and you can get a measuring tape. And then you can draw the line where you want, top to bottom in this case. Forgery is 1.80 and genuine is 1.77, 30 thou difference. I'm not significantly, I don't think that's easy within the realm of measurement error when I'm putting the precise point of the end of the line. 2.24, 2.26 horizontally, and 1.60 and 1.64. There's perhaps something. It may have been just that the paper was oriented differently and dried in a different direction depending on the web of the paper, horizontal versus vertical web. You could get a bit of a shrinkage one way or the other, and that would be consistent with one of these dimensions being longer and these two being shorter if the paper was dried in a different way. And finally, we have the expertly reperforated genuine number 2 to look like the rare 6-penny perforated version. This one's on laid paper, whereas number 13 is on wove. Interesting, there's a doubling down here we see in the lower left corner. And Ralph Trimble on his website basically says this doubling is on every stamp. It's not a feature, it's not a variety because it's on every stamp on the pane. So It was on the original die must, and then the transfer roll must have had this doubling. So every position that was entered also has it. And that's it.
Can we just go back over what is the difference between number 1 and number 4?
The paper,
The
sorry.
beavers,
Yeah.
and also number 2 and number 5, I guess it
Paper
is, or
type. One is on laid paper and one is on wove paper.
when they're on cover, can you distinguish the papers?
I've seen some references, yes, and some references, no. The other is the date. If it is an 1851 issue, it has to be number 1 to 3. And if it's a later in the 50s, it's probably the wove paper on cover. So that's the difference. Laid paper versus wove paper. There is a story of one person who took one of them, soaked it in water to soften up the paper fibers, and then imprinted it on the correct kind of weave and submitted it, hoping to get a certificate for it as genuine on laid paper. And he didn't have the laid paper lines correctly. Part of the distance was wrong,
Hmm.
and rejected it. But you can try to put laid paper lines onto a wove paper stamp, but the experts, it's a little bit hard to fool them. Why it only produced doubling here and not right here in this line, that's the subject of a separate presentation I gave, that I don't think these are really re-entries. I think these are pre-entries, that the die mass, the transfer roll was applied to the printing plate, and then they realized it's in the wrong place. They burnished out the whole image and reapplied it in the correct place, but they didn't burnish out some of the deeper cuts.
So it's actually the imperfect burnishing that leaves the reentry feature.
Correct. That's, yes. So
Yeah.
actually we should call pre-entries rather than re-entries
Mm-hmm.
beforehand.